It's the Science Revolution with Jayson O'Neill laying out just how bad it is when you've got a lobbyist, a fossil fuel lobbyist, running the Interior Department. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. So we were talking earlier about, what does conservative mean anymore? And I would expand that even to ask the question, what does Republican mean anymore? Increasingly, I've been arguing that it means we're in the pockets of big corporations or billionaires who themselves have interests in big corporations, period, full stop. We'll bring along a few racists, and we'll bring along a few fundamentalists, and we'll bring along a few, anti-abortion activists to get enough votes to have political power. But basically what we're all in it for is the money. And I think a classic example of this is what's going on over at the Department of Interior. On the line with us is Jayson O'Neill. He's the Deputy Director of the Western Values Project. The westernvaluesproject.org is their website, and you can tweet him at Western_values. Jayson, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having us, Tom. We're excited to be here and really chat about kind of what we believe is an unprecedented corporate capture, unseen arguably in American history across this administration. Right.
So the secretary is Bernhardt, right, for the Interior Department. I remember James Watt is kind of in the same mold, it seems, back in the day.
Yeah, we've harkened back to kind of the days of the land barons and the oil and gas land barons that are coming in and running really roughshod over our public lands and our environment.
Right. So let's start out with who is this guy? Where did he come from?
Yeah. So folks that haven't been following, our Secretary of Interior now that manages all America's natural resources and public lands and has input on our rivers and water resources, so all myriads of things. Well, here this guy comes from an experience of a lobbyist for the very extractive industry corporations that are now at the trough in seeking major environmental revisions and protections removed from our public lands. We know that David Bernhardt has represented at least 26 corporate entities that have a direct impact on the decisions that are being made at the Department of Interior. So to say that he's the ultimate swamp creature may be putting it lightly.
Yeah, it might be an insult to swamp creatures. So, particularly since he's actually in charge of supervising the swamps around the country, at least those that are protected. Let's start with the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm not sure when this was passed. Is this back Nixon-era law? This was the first really strong law to protect our national parks and our commons?
Yeah, that is correct. So, this is America's bedrock environmental law, dating back 50 years when Richard Nixon was really in a position almost forced to have to pass it. Remember in those times, that was when rivers were catching on fire.
Yeah, the Cuyahoga River, I remember it. It was right down the road from us.
There you go. So after 50 years of successes, ensuring that we balance kind of the decisions that we make on major projects and development and extractive development, the Trump administration and really David Bernhardt, the architect of these some 200 pages of revisions, really had decided that after 50 years of success, let's gut it for our corporate pals and our former clients in the case of David Bernhardt.
Are they able to do this because typically what legislation does, particularly when it creates an agency or a new policy, is it outlines broad goals, like, we want clean air and decent water, and we want to protect endangered species. But Congress doesn't have the expertise to micromanage that or even to micro-define what that means. And so they give these broad policy objectives, and then it's up to the agency to have their own scientists and their own experts figure out what's the best way to accomplish that goal. And so when somebody comes in who disagrees with the goal and says, well, what's the best way to screw up that goal, they simply have their scientists come up with different policies, and therefore you can have these huge differences in implementation of law from one administration to another because of that. Am I accurately describing that?
Yeah, and I think that is some of the uncertainty that has been brought forward by industry and projects on it, because it has changed. But what we see now under the Trump administration, though, is actually an agency that really even doesn't acknowledge science, which should be very frightening for the future of our country. And, we even had our appointed acting BLM director, William Penley, for folks that don't know of him. He's had a 30-year history fighting this very law, tell reporters that this was a terrible burden on us, implying that it was a burden for our agency to actually do the work to ensure that the public was protected and our environment was protected and our public health was protected by reviewing and analyzing a project through the guise of the NEPA law. One thing I think we should maybe start calling it, instead of the National Environmental Protection Act under Trump, maybe it's no environmental protections anymore. Because really, when we look at these revisions, and we can go down the top lines, and there's many organizations looking at kind of the minutia of it, but we can drive, corporations now can drive a truck through our environmental laws, which means that we don't have to consider the science. We can pick and choose what a project needs to be reviewed or when it doesn't need to be reviewed. And really, we're just going to be sticking our heads in the sand, ignoring probably the biggest issue that's hanging out over the entire world and the globe is climate emissions and the impacts of global warming. But again, when you put somebody as like a stable genius as Trump in charge, who's also filled his administration with over 280 lobbyists, really this is the outcome. They are working to move the ball forward and remove protections for the American people so corporations can put money in their pockets.
I understand that Secretary David Bernhardt has also, on numerous occasions, hidden meetings with industry lobbyists and industry fat cats on his calendar, or issued conflicting versions of his calendar. This guy knows what he's doing is wrong, right?
Yeah, by all accounts, when you don't release public information, you do things behind closed doors. Really, it shows what the intent is, and going forward from, his days as a mega lobbyist, we know he has at least 5 different versions of calendars. We've been able to go through and identify at least 12 meetings that Secretary Bernhardt or his deputy secretary have had regarding NEPA rollbacks. Furthermore, we've also identified directly 10 clients in which his former clients or the clients of his now most powerful lobby firm in the world, Brownstein and Hyatt, stand to directly benefit from the gutting of America's bedrock environmental law.
This is absolutely insane. Jayson O'Neill, Deputy Director of the Western Values Project. What can we do about this?
Well, first off, I think, sticking with the Trump theme, there's a completely inept 60-day comment period. There is going to be a petition to expand that. There's actually only 2 public meetings regarding 200 pages of some revisions to the NEPA law. There's going to be one in Washington, D.C., and there's going to be one out in Denver, but there's also going to be a petition to actually expand those meetings. But we need to contact and comment and say that we need to protect the lands, the water, our air, and our public health. There's an opportunity for people to comment on federalregister.gov, as well as talk to your elected officials. This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented corporate capture of our federal government, and our elected officials need to stand up to the Trump administration and say, no, public health is more important. Our wildlife is more important. Our clean water is more important. And the future of our country and, quite frankly, our planet is more important than lining the pockets of the 1% and the corporate billionaires who pay nothing back into our system.